Coming to you from Los Feliz, Los Angeles, I am Colin Marshall. This is the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. Today I'm sitting down with comic artist and writer Mimi Pond, author of several books. Her first, by the way, many of you in this neck of the woods may remember The Valley Girl's Guide to Life. Most recently, Over Easy. It's an autobiographical story about working at a diner in Oakland in the late 1970s. It's an era that, reading it, I couldn't help but think about Paul Thomas Anderson's movie, Boogie Nights. Because though that may be in the porn industry of the San Fernando Valley of the late 70s, it feels like a very different setting. It's still consumed with the question of, the 70s question of what comes after the 70s. How central was the question of what comes after the 70s to you at this time, when you were living in Oakland in the 70s?
Well, it was more of a matter of what comes after the 60s, because it's interesting you mentioned Boogie Nights, because it's also, I think, it's in the same realm of that, because it's really an examination of what I like to call the moral swamp of the late 70s. And right now my dog is trying to get you. Mabel, no. Mabel, no. Come here. Lay down. Come here. Lay down. He's not here to play with you. Yeah, I mean, the 70s bothered me since I was a teenager in the 70s, and I felt like we had missed the boat. The 60s had come along. The slightly older kids had all the fun, and now what did we have? We had Watergate, we had Nixon, we had, the Manson murders, the Patty Hearst kidnapping, the oil crisis, and the Captain and Tennille.
Sure, the whole suite.
Yeah, so it was, and the music then was just like the fetid, filthy bong water.
Oh my.
It was like arena rock and cheesy arena rock and the Carpenters and Loggins and Messina and all, just like this syrupy crap. And it was just awful, and I was like, this is what I get? Really? This is it? And so I was, at the time, listening to everything but contemporary music. I was listening mostly to old jazz and classical music and folk music, and just feeling like I'd been cheated out of like an exciting youth. But I think that's really common, that kids feel like they just missed the boat, and there's always going to be someone slightly older than you telling you, "Oh man, you should have been here 5 years ago. That's when it was really cool, man. Now it's over."
Right. It's the sense that, the party just ended. You're not getting in it. The party's over. It's interesting. I mean, the 70s. It's been a standard decade to make fun of for a long time. And I think of, as I say, Boogie Nights, a movie in the 90s about the 70s, which is poking fun at it to an extent, that era. But when I watch actual movies from the 70s, and me and other friends who were born after the 70s ended, we'll see artifacts from that time and think, boy, everything seems so shabby and hollowed out in the 70s. I mean, is that an accurate perception?
Yeah, it was just crappy. Everything was orange and brown and avocado green and beige, and it was just depressing. And it wasn't until punk music came along and really injected the scene with some really new energy. And it was, the great thing I thought about it was that it was like all like do-it-yourself, street-level energy. It didn't come from, it wasn't prepackaged. It wasn't like stuff you could buy, go to the mall and buy. You had to kind of make it up yourself as you went along. And that's what made it so great. Like putting together thrift store outfits, like just assembling disparate elements from different eras and making it new and fresh. And the same with the music, too.
People had to make their own cooler realities to some extent.
Yeah.
There's a sensibility that's in line with that. I mean, you have your central character, Margaret, in art school at the beginning of this book, or towards the beginning. Art school was, what kind of a place was that to be in the 70s?
Well, again, it was sort of the feeling that whatever had been exciting that was going on was now just sort of over, and you were just kind of left holding the bag and wondering, like, what did I miss? I mean, I enjoyed my art school experience. I felt like I got some really good skills, and I liked my teachers, but back then no one was really teaching you how to market yourself after art school. It was just sort of assumed that you were going to go to graduate school and you were going to you were going to hang inside this ivory tower as long as you could. And I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to go out and live life,
Right. And
I had a very romantic idea of what it was to live life.
Right, that's what I'm going to. Margaret in the book, she has many ideas about, well, she gets her student loan bill and doesn't want to stick it out in art school because of that. Goes to work at her favorite diner, or recently a diner that has become her favorite, and has a sort of, I don't know, I wouldn't want to call it fetishistic, but a very rich mental image of what it is to work hard and not think about art at all, right?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about art. I think I just wanted to be in a working environment where it wasn't all about art and bullshit talk about art,
Right. It's this syndrome where if something is about art, that's one thing, but if the world you're in is all about art, that's where it turns a bit poisonous.
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. And I really, as much as I appreciate what the teachers I had gave me in terms of technical craft and discipline and focus, there was no appreciation for cartooning then. It was really looked down upon. And I grew up in a family with a father who was an amateur cartoonist who taught me how to draw very early, and everyone just always said in my house that I was going to be a cartoonist. It was just sort of a foregone conclusion. And I didn't see anything wrong with trying to make a living doing that. But, in art school, it was like, oh, well, that, and there's still, I think there's been huge leaps and bounds with cartooning and graphic novels just in the last 15 years. Right. But there's still a lot of fight coming from the traditional art world about cartooning and whether it is art. Mm. It's lowbrow, along with all that other kind of lowbrow art. And I don't lump it in with that whole lowbrow art scene at all. I think it's its own purely American art form, and it deserves as much respect as any other art.
Having myself grown up in Seattle in the 90s, where alternative comics were just sort of the main thing to read, it seems like. There was this whole phrase, as I say, alternative comics. It was an existing world. In 1978, I take it that was not a known world, if it existed at all.
No, you knew about underground cartoonists, and I had become acquainted with Robert Crumb in Spain and Bob Armstrong, who did Mickey Rat, and those were great people to know. But at the same time, their attitude, which I think it all sprung from Crumb. They all followed Crumb. They all they didn't copy him literally their work, but the attitude. They took all their cues from him, and he had this very negative attitude about the prospect of ever being respected or making any money doing comics. Right. And so their whole attitude was like, no one's ever going to respect us, and screw it. And they were bitter. They were like guys in their probably mid to late 30s at that point, and they were already bitter. And I felt like, fine, I'll go do mainstream comics. I'll sell comics to mainstream magazines. So what if I'm selling out? It's better than waiting tables the rest of my life. No
doubt. And when did you realize that you didn't want to be waiting tables in the long term?
Well, after working a year full time doing waiting tables, it's enough to make you hate people before they walk in the door. It's really a hard job, physically and emotionally and mentally. It's just very hard work, and I was up to it, but I knew I didn't want to keep doing it forever,
I think of the action in the book in Over Easy. I think of the actual process of waiting the tables you describe and how the cafe operates. It seems like everybody, in any two parties, there's always both friendship and hatred. The customers you have to at least act friendly toward, then you can go behind into the kitchen and start swearing at them. The cooks and the waitresses, they may be friendly at the core, but they're verbally abusive to each other.
There's always this war between the waitresses and the cooks. I mean, there's constant friction there, and each one thinks that the job they're doing is the more important one. And the reason that restaurant specifically was the only restaurant I ever could have worked at in the entire world was because the manager, our boss, who's called Laszlo Merengue in the book, was a guy who totally had your back. And he was a former Latin scholar and a poet and a former high school English teacher. And he agreed with you that, this is just a game we're playing for now. We're taking notes and we're going to make art from this later. And this is just a goof. And anyone who thinks otherwise is crazy. And it was the perfect kind of support for me to have, just to know that, that's your boss.
Right.
We were always taking notes and comparing notes about customers and who they reminded us of and what they must do and where they came from, speculating on their whole backgrounds. And also he ran the restaurant like it was his own strange punk rock opera. He cast it like he was casting some bizarre anarchic opera,
Right. It's a point of curiosity that's come up about the Laszlo character for me. Of course, this is only the first volume of the story over Easy, and this isn't fully revealed in it yet, but I have to ask, why did Laszlo run this restaurant?
Well, that's the thing about the 70s is like, why did anything happen? Because it could. Because there was no one telling you couldn't do that stuff. That was the great thing about back then. It was like, anything was possible. And there was no just say no. It was like, just say yes to everything. And of course it couldn't go on like that indefinitely,
It's true. I guess hearing so many 70s stories, like Boogie Nights and beyond, I was almost primed reading over Easy, seeing the drug dealer come in and whatnot, and seeing people snort coke on their shifts, like, someone's going to be dead by the end of this book, or we're going to get the grim aftermath will come in this book. But unlike many a 70s story, the grim aftermath does not come in this book. It's a high note you end on. Oh, there's a grim aftermath to come in the sense of in the continued story, or it's the grim aftermath everybody grandly knows in America of the 1970s. In what sense is it a grim aftermath?
Well, I don't want to give too much away.
Right. Don't do that.
I would say both of those things.
Okay. So I look forward to reading it. The grim, as we say, though that may be. But I want to go back to something you said about observing people at this restaurant, because naturally with your visual sense, you will have at this job seen so many visual examples of humanity, but as well, you have humanity coming to you. You get to, how wide a swath of humanity could you observe at this job?
Fairly wide. It was not a cheap place to eat. It wasn't like a regular coffee shop where, a plate of eggs was $2. It was one of the first of its kind. It was in the same school as Chez Panisse and the burgeoning foodie movement. It just never got the respect or the press that Chez Panisse did, but it was all about the same thing. It was like this revelation that you could serve breakfasts that were made with fully fresh ingredients like butter and cream and fresh fruit and fresh vegetables instead of the kind of frozen hash browns and
the crab is made a big deal of as well. People love the crab.
Yeah, real cream in the coffee, not just half and half, but actual cream. Linen napkins. It was all deluxe and it was kind of mind blowing for anyone used to eating regular coffee shop food. Everyone, it was a kind of, and omelets, which were a big thing in the 70s, just sort of trend-wise, it was a big omelet era.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I think starting in the 60s, omelets were getting hot, and then they just continued. And then I think brunch became a big deal in the 70s.
Oh, I see. That was, and it remains, and so it remains today, it seems.
I still hate brunch.
Was that an artifact of working at the cafe, or is it just something you've never liked?
Both working there and also like going out. Anytime you go out for brunch, there's going to be a crowd.
Oh, sure.
And you're sitting and waiting it to get served, and you're getting crankier and crankier because it's already like 11 o'clock or noon and you haven't eaten. It's not good. And so, the brunch crowd, they're cranky by the time they get served.
It's a recipe for disaster. I can see how that. Yeah, I've had some unsatisfactory brunch experiences. But at this cafe, in the book, it is the Imperial. You draw it, and Margaret describes it as looking like it was formerly. It used to be like an abandoned Chinese restaurant. The decor is fascinating. Is that how the actual place still looks today?
Yeah, it still looks that way. It's exactly like it looks, and it was an old Chinese restaurant, and it's really beautiful.
I want to get a sense of you drawing these memories again, because you initially began this book as a memoir, did you not? A non-visual memoir, right?
Yeah, well, as a regular conventional fictionalized memoir. The first day I went to work in this restaurant, I knew there was a story that I was going to have to tell at some point. It was crystal clear to me.
On day one, here's a rich place.
Yeah, and I spent years trying to figure out what that story really was. And when our son was born in 1992, this light bulb went off. That this restaurant manager who we all had venerated, I was like, wait a minute, he had a family at home, but he chose to like spend his free time hanging out with a bunch of 20-somethings and drinking and doing drugs. Right. He really, this complicates things, because he's not really the person that I had thought that he was. It becomes a much more gray area morally, just as the 70s were a complete gray area morally, or what I like to call a moral swamp. And then I had to like really examine my memories and my relationship with him and really think about that. And it makes it much more interesting, I think, when there's moral gray areas, and when major protagonists are not entirely positive people, when they have complicated backstories. It makes it much more interesting.
And atop the moral swamp, as you say, in this restaurant, it seems like many restaurants develop into their own small ecosystem where if there are societal rules, which maybe there weren't in the 70s anymore, those don't really apply anyway.
Yeah, I mean, they're their own little microcosms.
Mm-hmm. Tell me how. I mean, that seems like that element itself would make anybody want to write about a place. But how long did it take for, as you say, the sense of what the story was to cohere in your mind, what the story of this cafe was, the process you've just described? How long before you could look back and see a shape to it?
I had been taking notes for years and years, but it probably after my son was born and I finally figured out what the story generally was, it took about another 6 years to start to really work on it. I mean, I kind of slowly tried to outline it and eventually began writing it, I guess, around 1998. And in the early 2000s, my agent tried to sell it, and he couldn't. And it was really frustrating. And there was some editor who came back and said, well, has she considered doing this as a graphic novel? And I was just furious. It just hit this nerve. It's like, how dare she? If I wanted to do it as a graphic novel, I'd do it as a graphic novel. I mean, she has no respect. And it was like, it touched a nerve. And I finally had to break down and admit that that's really what it wanted to be. And then I was like, what am I, nuts? I can't do that. That's just way too much drawing. I could never draw that much. That's crazy. And then this little voice inside me said, but you like to draw.
See, this was the question I had, because I'd read elsewhere about your struggles with the fact that the agent couldn't sell the non-visual version of the, shall we say. And I did wonder, why didn't she want to make it a graphic novel? You'd think, given your skill, your visual skill and your experience there, that would be your first instinct. But in fact, it was not.
If you didn't have two children to take care of.
So it was purely the time thing?
Yeah. I just didn't have very much time of my own to work. I mean, I had, 2 kids to take care of, a house to take care of. Right. And I just couldn't fathom it at that point, sort of.
How does the focus change in a story like this when you go from writing to illustrating?
Not that much. The only difference is you just have to do a lot of editing. I mean, every sentence on the page said, every sentence said, I want to be a page.
Ah, yes.
And you had to argue with every sentence, go, no, you might get to be a panel if you're lucky, you know? And then there was a lot of stuff that was description that obviously is just, you know, the background of the action. And so then you're just concentrating on drawing the action and drawing, you know, having the dialogue spoken by the characters. And so, I mean, there was a few minor plot points that I had to toss out completely. And I just had to, you know, nothing's left out. It's essentially the same, which is why it's 270 pages and it's just the first half.
Yes.
So yeah, not that much really. You just have to, show, don't tell. But, I mean, there's still a fair amount of telling just because I like words and I like storytelling, but I also try to, do a lot of showing and expression of mood through visuals rather than through words.
As we say, this takes place in Oakland, Over Easy does, where you went after leaving San Diego before going to New York. And tell me what it was like to bring to life again, shall we say, the Oakland of that era. I mean, was it that different? Was it a bringing back to life, or is this, in essence, the Oakland that in your mind there has always been and there still is?
It was still always just there, and I was very fortunate. One of the people who worked there was a photographer and took a lot of photographs of it and allowed me. He had been keeping a scrapbook of the place for a long time and allowed me to scan a lot of those photographs.
Wow. So you have from that era photos?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Wow. And I want to get a sense as well of was it a matter to you of faithfully replicating this setting, or was there a sense that you also had to, that you wanted to be more true to how it felt to be there? Is there a difference, or can you accomplish both those goals by just doing how it was?
I hope I accomplished both those things. It's fiction. It's, there's characters. It's not literally the truth, and it's not completely fiction, but there were so many people who worked there and so many interesting people. If you tried to do it literally, it would be like a Russian novel. Yes. And so there's a number of characters a number of actual people who work there who inspired me to compress them into from 5 line cooks into one, right. Or from 3 waitresses into one. So I hope through fiction to get to the essence and the truth of the spirit of the time.
There's one minor character who is one of the many boyfriends of one of the other waitresses, who is, I think, Canadian, but he pretends to be British, and he just stacks lie on top of lie about his life. And I assume he stands in for many a real character like that in that era or in any era.
Actually, that was one real person.
One guy. Well, then this makes the question I want to know even more. Margaret says in the book, his blatant mendacity fascinates me. So what was going on with this fellow?
He was just a straight up con man.
Oh yes.
And everybody thought he was awful, all except this one waitress who was completely in love with him, and to this day still professes great fondness for him. And you should otherwise completely sensible and very smart woman, but I'm like,
yes.
Wow.
But do you know where the fellow is these days? Can you track down any of these people?
Oh yeah, a lot of them are still around.
Oh, still in Oakland,
yeah, he's not, but okay. A lot of them are, yeah.
Oh, it is fascinating though that where the character Margaret is in her life, and how the era is that somebody who's just, because he so thoroughly lies, that itself is fascinating. That fits in with the no rulesiness of the era, does it not? That's just something you can do, is just lie a lot about stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and to me, I mean, I come from a home where you could just never lie. I mean, I could never lie to my mother. I would never consider it. As I became a teenager, I learned how to get around that by just avoiding revealing certain details.
Yes.
But straight up lies, I'm not good at that. I'm always afraid I'm going to be found out. So it's always fascinating for me to meet people who are just so invested in lying. And it's like I said in the book, it's like, isn't a liar just a storyteller who hates themselves?
Right. I like that line. And that's representative of something else I wanted to ask about, which is that even a character, as you described, the real guy, was awful. The character in the book, I don't think is judged, at least not harshly. Nobody in the book is really judged, I don't think. I mean, it's whether is it to do with the perspective of Margaret, the main character, or you wanted to write a book that had a non-judgmental perspective on a moral swamp of an era. Do you know? I'm not sure what difference I'm getting at, but how did you think about that?
Well, I don't necessarily pass judgment because it's just the way it was at the time, and there's no point in rewriting history,
Right.
And saying things were different than what they were. It just was the way it was. It's all in the context of the times. And it was a confusing era to live in, where you kind of had to forge your own moral path, I think.
Right. See, it was up to you. You were kind of in a void, and
Yeah.
go forth and make your own rules, which is, people say that a little bit about today, but I mean, would you say we're in a considerably more moralistic time than the late 70s?
Far more judgmental. Ever since I think the 80s and on, it's, there's constant judgment. And one of the things that irritates me most is, we're supposed to be more enlightened about feminism, and yet girls are constantly being slut-shamed for having sexual adventures, which men have been doing for millennium. No one says anything about that. Boys will be boys. Men go out and cat around. And if women do the same thing, it's like, oh, what a slut. Oh, God, she's pathetic, and back then there wasn't that. There just wasn't. The whole tenor of the times was like, it was women's liberation. It was sexual liberation. You were supposed to go out and get all the nookie you could. You just go out and do it. That was like your moral right and privilege. Right. And this was pre-AIDS, so of course, there was no one thought anything of that. It was just like, go out and have fun. Why not? It was harmless. I mean, and I think today it still is harmless, just in terms of, if you use protection and you don't take a lot of pictures that wind up on the internet. Yes. Your private life is your private life. And what you have to learn in your growth as an adult about how you express your sexuality and how you deal with other people, in your life, whether it's through sexual relationships or non-sexual relationships, it's your own business. Mm-hmm.
Now, was it tricky to portray that element of this era accurately, to an early 21st century audience, especially to readers, and there will be many of them who never experienced the era themselves, getting that across, what that actually was and what it meant? How did you think about that?
I wasn't really thinking about how to get it across to anyone younger. I just wanted to tell the story as I remembered it. Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing I've just recently been struggling with is how to explain to kids why we hated disco so much, because there's this huge nostalgic veil over the idea of disco now, and it's like, oh, it's so much fun, and right. Studio 54 and all this stuff. But what kids don't realize is the context of who the people who liked disco were versus who the people who liked punk rock were.
Pure identity struggle, conflict.
Yeah. So people who were into disco were the same people who are now look like Guy Fieri, okay. Jersey Shore people. Sure. Douchebags. Disco, douchebags.
That was the douchebag of the day.
Yes, douchebag of the day. Like, if you were a woman and you went by yourself into a disco, right. then you just constantly had to fight off all these sleazebags wearing like nylon Kiana open neck shirts with gold chains and polyester pants and platform shoes.
The caricature was real.
Yes, it was absolutely real.
I feel like
like Steve Martin, the Wild and Crazy Guys, like that.
Sure. Oh my God. So, how did you feel when the 1990s, 70s revival hit? When it became fashionable in a way to look back on disco and say, "Oh, that was amusing." Were you thinking, "No, that all sucked. Don't make that 70s show. Don't." I like
that 70s show. I think it was good.
That's true. It didn't lionize the disco guys.
No, it didn't. But the people who were into disco were tended to be very bourgeois, very conventional middle class people, whereas people who were into, hippies and punks were united over their hatred of disco. That was the great thing.
And you didn't like hippies much either.
No, but they were just kind of there. They were always around. They're still there. Oakland and Berkeley, it's still a hotbed of hippies.
If you go to the cafe, can you see some of the same hippies sitting away with their coffee?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my.
Along with everyone else, it's just, it's become part of the mainstream in a way. It's sort of a given. It's funny, too, to meet people now who are like hippie spawn, the children of hippies.
So what are they like, to your mind, when you meet these kids? What do you think?
I think there's a lot of them who rebel and become very conventional because
the family ties thing.
Yeah, it really is.
You mentioned what fascinates me, this identity thing about especially disco and punk, and how I think today a kid might easily have punk and disco on their iPod and just listen to them on shuffle. It's the identity stuff has gone away. I would think that's.
The context is gone. It's it's just like, I'm sure in the big band era there was the same thing. There were like people who listened to Glenn Miller and people who listened to, I don't know, help me out, other big band.
Oh, sure.
Harry James or whatever, and they were like, they saw enormous. Like I got my dad a compilation CD of big band stuff because he said he wanted some big band music for Christmas, and it turned out I got him all the wrong stuff.
Oh, so this isn't what I liked. This is the disco, and I like the punk of big band.
Exactly. I'm sure there's very careful nuances for the people who lived through those eras, but once you get beyond that, it's like. It's like now there's like those two paintings at the Huntington Gardens, Pinky and Blue Boy. Everyone thinks they were like painted by the same artist, and they're actually like 30 years apart, and they're painted by two different artists completely, and they have absolutely nothing to do with each other, and they just happen to get lumped together in this collection.
Right. Speaking of visual art, tell me, when you accepted that Over Easy wanted to be a graphic novel, what was the process of thinking through or finding out how it would look, what the look of Over Easy would be? Because it does look very distinctive when you actually read it. But what did you know when you started about how it needed to look? Well,
I think what really helped me the most was when Alison Bechdel's book Fun Home came out. It was it was kind of a prototype. It was like, that's what I can do it like that. It's just the size of it and the tones, the shading. Not that I have tried to copy Alison's style, because I haven't done that, and she's a brilliant artist, and I love that book. But it just, in terms of models for a book, there were other graphic novels that had come out, but nothing. I just didn't relate to it the way I related to that. I was like, oh, I can do it like this, and that really helped. That was like really finally made me think I could do it.
And when you were putting it together, what did like this mean in the actual process?
Well, it has been in my head for 35 years, so I just knew what it looked like. That's all I can tell you.
I see. Well, that's a good thing, although you get that out of the way, and then all the other many considerable challenges ahead, they come along. I wonder, tell me a bit about how we see Margaret in the book working on her drawing. How do you think your visual style has changed in those decades? Is it something you can actually look at and sense for yourself, or do other people have to tell you how you've changed in drawing style?
I I think I've, subtly changed over the years. I think I've, having spent as much time as I have drawing this book, I think I've gotten to be better at drawing than I was before. Certainly better at drawing the restaurant from every conceivable angle.
Yes.
And I continue to do comics occasionally for the LA Times.
Right.
And that's kind of different because it's just sort of a looser, more cartoony style. And this is sort of, there's character design that's based on my memories of what people look like, and some of whom look like some of the actual people who work there, and some of them are made from whole cloth. So it's just sort of a matter of adopting a specific style for this particular book that I have. I mean, my other work tends to be sort of looser and more cartoony.
And the task as well of bringing back the mindset that you had in those days, just after art school, where I've heard you describe elsewhere, you coming from San Diego, it was kind of a blank place to come from. So there was almost you didn't come freighted with that much baggage of a place with, say, more quote unquote history, or as well, not being allied with hippies or certainly not disco people. In a sense, you were not necessarily a neutral observer, but you were in a pretty good place to come close to that, right? Of what was going on then, because you weren't embedded in much.
Yeah, I think that's true, because there just wasn't, it was kind of a blank, you were just found yourself in this landscape, and no one, and also being a woman, there was absolutely no expectations of you, because no one expected you to do anything except get married and have children.
Even in the 1970s?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was far more sexist, and there was a lot, oh God, the crap you had to put up with from guys all the time.
Oh, my.
I mean, all the time. It was just a given. It was just like, what was there. You sat at the bus stop and guys catcalled you from cars or pulled over and tried to get you to get in their cars.
Sure.
And guys were always trying to pick you up. And I know that still happens today, but I don't think there's as much of a feeling of entitlement on the part of men that they can treat women that way or talk to them that much anymore as there was then.
I'd be afraid of getting arrested if I was pulling up and saying, get into my car.
It was great because I felt like Harriet the Spy. Like I always knew I was taking notes, and I was, I kept sketchbooks all the time, and I had a goal. I wanted to move to New York and become a cartoonist, and no one else imagined that for me or told me I could do that except my immediate family. And so my whole idea was just like, screw it, I'm going to do what I want. If you don't think I can do anything, I'm going to surprise you.
Right. It's like a bit like Robert Crumb saying, I'm not going to get respect, I'll do whatever I want.
Yeah. Although his overlay was like, negative, why bother?
Sure,
it's hopeless.
Sure.
Mine was just like, I don't care if you're going to be completely dismissive of me and look right through me. I'm still here, and I'm taking notes on everything.
Tell me about some of the. First, I want to know with all the people you were working with at the cafe, how many of them really did have these things going on where this is what I do during the day, but I have some clearly are better poets than you might have thought they were in the book anyway. How many people had their own thing going on under the surface?
Not that many. I mean, that was the thing that made it kind of perilous. There were other people who'd been in art school, but who kind of like immediately rolled over and gave up on the whole idea of making art. And a lot of people there were just like, they'd work all day in the restaurant and then they'd go to the bar in the afternoon and they'd spend like hours and hours in there. And then
always the same bar in the book anyway.
And it's really skeevy bar. Piedmont Lounge, which is now a Starbucks.
Oh my.
And I was just like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
And it sort of served to... Now, I mean, a number of the people who work there have gone on to, left the place and pursued other careers and done other things with their lives. And, everyone has their own journey. But at the time, it felt there was this hardcore it felt like there was a hardcore contingent of people who were just devoted to going to the bar every night. And if you stood up and said, I'm not going to do that, I have goals and I'm going to do this, they were very threatened by that. And you're like, you think you're better than we are, and fuck you, you know?
Yes.
And I was like, no, it's just that I'm not going to do that.
Right, exactly. What made the art students who roll over immediately?
I think it's just what makes anyone roll over immediately who isn't really an artist. I mean, you can go to art school and fool yourself into thinking you're going to be an artist, but if you don't have that compulsion and that drive to see yourself through, it's not going to happen. I think if you're really an artist, you're going to do whatever it takes to keep making art.
Right, even if you get that student loan notice that says you're going to have to pay all the money in the world.
Yeah.
The question is, well, do you keep making art or don't you, right?
Yeah. If you want it bad enough, you find a way to make it work.
The process of drawing the cafe, of drawing the setting again, I mean, how much did you go back there? How much did you go back and experience the places that you had known before?
Many, many times. I mean, I still have very dear friends there, and it's still owned by the same person. And I still have a friend working there who has started working there shortly after I did, who's a career waitress and just a fabulous person and a very close friend. And it feels like family. And so I have never stopped going there. In fact, our son is graduating from California College of the Arts, which used to be California College of Arts and Crafts, my school. And he briefly worked there part-time as a dishwasher.
Right.
So.
Following in the footsteps.
Yeah.
He's a legacy dishwasher. But tell me, of course you mentioned your son, and I want to know what you find interesting, if anything, about the contrast between his experience getting out of college, dishwashing and so on, and yours in this era, in the era of Over Easy. Are there things that jump out about? Are the situations starkly different?
I think they're very different. I think it was really easy to live on almost nothing then. I was renting a whole house for $300 a month back then, and you know, you could get everything you needed from the thrift store. You could live very cheaply, and that was also kind of the danger of that too, because you could just kind of coast along for years without accomplishing anything, because you like cover your monthly nut, you know, pretty easily, putting in shifts, and you could dick around forever, and then you like suddenly wake up one day and say, I'm 45 years old, I haven't done anything, and some people that actually do, you know, that does happen to them.
As you say, you worked with at least one lady who became a careered waitress. What did you learn about what it takes to be a good waitress? Because I feel like it's a job a lot of people think they can do, but it's a job that very few people can do well for a long time.
Well, I think you have to anticipate people's needs, and the first thing you do is you get them drinks and you see if there's anything they want right away so that they feel taken care of. Right. And then you try to get them their food and get them what they want, and make sure that they're, you know, just make them feel like they're being taken care of. Because, you know, you go in a restaurant, you feel like you're kind of, as a customer, kind of a hostage to your waitress, because this, you know, you can't do anything. They have to bring it all to you. And so it feels to them like they have power over you. Right. And whereas the waitress feels like the customer has power over them. Yeah. So there's this all constant power brokerage going on, this push-pull of who really has the power in the situation. And so some people feel like, you know, some people want to treat you like you're the mommy, and some customers feel like, you know, they're the great, you know, patron, and they're going to either reward you or be punitive depending on how you treat them. So it's a complex dialogue, and every table is different. So you have to kind of learn how to suss out each individual situation in a really instinctive and rapid way.
What's something your instincts develop to tell you quickly about what type of customer someone would be, what type of a table someone would have? These lessons that I guess generalize to the rest of life, where you're trying to size somebody up quick. What type of thing can you learn working a job like that?
Oh, you know, just the way someone asks for what they want to drink, and the way they look over the menu, and are they relaxed? Are they tense? Are they? I mean, the most important thing is like people who come in hungry are not themselves. It's like that Snickers commercial. Sure. You're not yourself when you're hungry. So. Right. That's you kind of have to treat them like children. You like immediate gratification and fussing over them. It's never a bad thing. I mean, some people don't want to be fussed over though. So that's the other thing. It's all these subtle nuances.
Right. Do you think a truly good waitress is born rather than made? Or is it a core personality type?
I think there's certain personality types. You have to be able to like, put your ego aside to deal with people, because I mean, for me, it felt like role playing, it's sort of like improv. What do you want me to be? Do you want me to be like this? Do you want me to be sexy? Do you want me to be maternal? Do you want me to be efficient? Sure. No nonsense, very familiar. It just changes from moment to moment.
And that seemed to be a sensibility openly acknowledged at the cafe. Like, we're all playing roles here, so might as well make peace with that and do what we can as role players, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it made it much more fun to do it that way than to think of yourself like, I guess I'm just going to be a waitress the rest of my life. I'm just a doormat.
Toward the end of this book, the first volume in the story, Over Easy, Margaret gets, I don't know if you call it her break in cartooning, but she starts professionalizing her cartooning. When you began professionalizing your drawing, how did it feel like some grand shift had been made in your life?
Well, it was exciting just to be in print, even though it was in a classified sex rag.
Yes, I love that. I'm surprised they ran cartoons.
Well, it was the 70s. Everyone ran more cartoons then. Everyone. I mean...
I feel like it was the 70s as the answer to a lot of questions about this book.
Yes, it was. It was really bizarre. And it was the Spectator was actually the money-making sister of the Berkeley Barb, which at that point was really not making any money. So they had started up this, classified sex classifieds weekly, and but when I went to start sending my clippings away to legitimate magazines, I would just say that it was in the Berkeley Barb, I think.
I see. Close enough,
and in New York back then, because there was no internet, they had no idea. They just thought, oh, Berkeley Barb, radical organ of the left.
No one's going to check.
Yeah, no one's going to check.
I enjoyed this. It was one of those things I knew. I guess they had to exist, but it's hard from the perspective of this era to realize it is the actual waiting room at this sex classifieds magazine, where there's the row of pasty middle-aged guys and the hookers all like hand putting in their ads with an old lady taking it. It's like, I know that must have been the case, but it's, again, internet era, very hard to believe, isn't it? Even for you who saw that, it's got to be hard to think was that a real thing, right?
It was really a thing. It was hilarious, and as a cartoonist, it's just like a gift.
Right. You had to see a lot more of that kind of hilarious/grotesque stuff in person in those days, right? On the internet, so much of it can be conducted anonymously. Back then, everything was in person, right?
Right. Well, just like, before the internet, there were dirty bookstores, and you had to go to them and buy your porn there, and now we take it for granted that we have this privacy in terms of all of that. But, back then, you want to get dirty and disgusting, you had to do it in public.
Yes, it's hard to imagine. Tell me a little bit more about the contrast between the era of the life you write and draw on Over Easy, and you mentioned, of course, other cartoons you've done about that are poking more fun at life in Los Angeles now. What's the difference in the sort of material you find back from your own memories then, and from what you can draw from your life in Los Angeles today?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's still the same. It's still observational stuff about everyday life in Los Angeles, and just the oddball experiences that are available here. and things that are very, I mean, the LA Times, they always want me to do things that are very specifically Southern California related. Right. So, I haven't done any in, I think over a year because I've been so busy working on this book. Mm-hmm. But, you know, like, the Day of the Dead celebration at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, right. Is a very, you know, comic experience. Going to Richard Simmons' gym in Beverly Hills and doing a aerobic workout with him is just like a gift of the comic gods. I mean, God bless him. You know, he comes to every workout in a different costume and works out in it. You know, gladiator, bride, poodle. You know, it's just fantastic. You know, going to a Civil War reenactment out in Chatsworth. Mm.
I think of a comic I read of yours recently, which was a hamster show in Griffith Park, a much smaller scale event than you had pictured, but it did leave me with a lingering question. You go to this hamster show where the one lady is showing hamsters and evaluating other hamsters at a card table over in Griffith Park, and you say to yourself, this should be hilarious, and yet why are we all so sad about this idea that a lady is devoting her life to hamsters? Have you thought any more about why that's so sad?
Well, you know, you just think this is all she has in her life. Right. She's living in, you know, she just, like in the cartoon, I'm imagining she's living in a studio apartment surrounded by, you know, yes. hamsters scurrying around in little plastic balls, you know, eating her dinner off of a TV tray and watching Animal Planet.
You never imagine, like, she leads a very rich life except for the hamster thing.
Very rich life. I could just be completely condescending and cruel.
But we all make the assumption, I think you do, which is that, oh, this lady has only hamsters, and it's, even if no matter how much satisfaction she draws from the hamsters, it's still going to make us a bit sad that it's about hamsters, her life, right?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Why is that? Why does it make us sad?
Yeah, even if let's say that she does get a lot of fulfillment from the hamsters, it still is somehow saddening.
There must be more than hamsters, let's face it.
Yeah, that's true. There must be more. Now, you're going to be doing a number of events related to Over Easy, including an actual event at the Real Cafe, the real version of the Imperial Cafe. What's going on there?
Well, I'll be doing a reading and book signing there, but it's going to have a really elegiac tone because one of the major players in this book and in the real life restaurant is a woman who's worked there since the beginning, who suddenly and unexpectedly died last week, which is really shocking and mind blowing and shocking and yet not unexpected. She had not been in good health for a long time, and she was absolutely one of a kind character and person, and we'll all miss her. And so it's just the timing is very odd for me. I mean, I don't want to make it all about me when it's a person's life has been lost, but it's just such a major part of the whole story and the mythos of the restaurant in real life is this person.
It will be a chance to pay tribute to her, I suppose.
I certainly hope so.
You will also be at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, and what's the panel you'll be on there?
You know, I don't know what the name of it is. I've forgotten, but it's with Vanessa Davis, who's a very good friend of mine, and Anders Nilsson and Ben Catcher.
And most important to highlight is you have the launch going on at Skylight Books on the 30th, and that will be, any specific things we should know about that, or just that it's going on then? Just
it's going on, it'll be fun. It's a great neighborhood bookstore.
Right, if anybody hasn't gone to Skylight Books, I think anybody in Los Angeles listening to this will have certainly gone, but anybody coming through, certainly do go there. And speaking of destinations, you know, next time I'm in Oakland, I will want to go to the inspiration for the Imperial Cafe. I will want to go to the actual place. When I do, I don't know, do you have recommendations for what I should get there?
Well, everything's good. I like the Spanish omelet. Their home fried potatoes cannot be beat by anyone anywhere. It's all good. They have a lot of daily specials. They have fresh squeezed orange juice. It's just all good.
And does it still have some centrality to Oakland life?
Oh yeah, it's a major place in Oakland. Everyone knows about it. It's famous. And my friend Sherry, who still works there, is like maybe the most famous waitress there. She's such a fixture of the place. You should ask for Sherry.
I'll ask for Sherry. It's, reading this book, it surprises me that the place still exists, because I almost imagine, this is one of those cafes that was too special a place to keep going on or what have you. But in Oakland, it seems like
it's not run the same way anymore. It can only go on so long like that.
Sure, the 70s had to stop.
Yeah, and to his credit, George Marino, the owner, is a very astute businessman who knew when he had to regroup and make people start paying attention to the bottom line.
Right. The party's over.
I don't know that the party's ever been over, because it's still a great place, but
that party is over. New party.
There were no rules. Now there's rules.
I see. That's a good summing up of the difference in era, I suppose. I've been speaking here with Mimi Pond. She's the author of the graphic novel Over Easy, which is the first part of a longer story about waitressing in a very distinctive time and a distinctive place, Oakland, in the late 1970s. Mimi, thanks so much.
Thank you.
This has been the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with me at colinmarshall.org or with the LARB at lareviewofbooks.org. Thanks.